Thank you, Jackie. So, hello everyone. My name is Melissa Dodson, and welcome to Framing Your Research Agenda Using a Research Continuum. This is a webinar. I have my colleagues here. Michael?
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Vaden-Kiernan. I'm the Director of Research and Evaluation here at CETL, and I'm also the lead on Task 4, which is the Applied Research and Evaluation Task for the REL Southwest. Glad to be with you all this afternoon.
Hi everybody, my name is Brenda Arellano, and I'm the Alliance researcher here on two alliances for the New Mexico Achievement Gap and also the New Mexico Pre-K. And thank you for joining us today. So we're going to begin today by sharing a little bit about the REL program. And I'm sure many of you, or some of you out there, might not be familiar with what the REL program actually stands for. So I thought Melissa could tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So the REL stands for Regional Educational Laboratory. There are 10 regional labs throughout the country, each serving a portion of the country. And on this map, what you see is the REL Southwest is identified in orange there, and we serve 5 states, including Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico.
Great. So can you also tell us, Melissa, a little bit more about what the RELs do and what their purpose is?
I can do that. The RELs partner with state departments of education, school districts, and other policymakers and practitioners to conduct research and build capacity to use data, particularly the state longitudinal data systems, in order to better understand important educational problems related to student academic achievement outcomes. In the big picture, the goal is to help practitioners and policymakers answer questions about the challenges they face educating their students on a daily basis. What's interesting about this round of the RELs, I think, is that the current version of the REL contracts are modeled after the Chicago Consortium on School Research, which is a research alliance between the University of Chicago and the Chicago Public Schools that has operated for many years, addressing relevant issues in the district, using the district's data to address alliance-driven topics of interest. The RELs are really, in many ways, a big experiment to try to scale this model up at a national level.
So, like Michael said, research alliances are a key feature of the RELs. And the REL Southwest, we have 6 alliances in the region, each addressing a different problem of practice or pressing educational challenges. This year we started recruiting members for these alliances who are typically educational practitioners and policy makers at the state or district level who will partner with us, the REL Southwest staff, to address those challenges. RELs work with alliance members to develop research agendas, articulate research questions, and answer those questions. And each REL works with multiple alliances that focus on the region's high priority topics. Michael, you want to start with Arkansas?
Yeah, we thought we'd just go through some of the alliances that are currently working with us on the REL Southwest real briefly. I'm glad to talk a little bit about the Arkansas Pre-K Research Alliance. The primary focus of the alliance is on the quality and effectiveness of its state's pre-K programs. It involves alliance members from the Arkansas Department of Human Services, Health, and Education, including the Arkansas Research Center, which is a database clearing center there in the state. It also includes members of the Arkansas Head Start Association, as well as various community and school-based pre-K sites from across the state. The other alliance I want to talk briefly about is the Louisiana Charter Schools Research Alliance, which is based in New Orleans. Involves members from the leadership as well as membership from the East Bank Collaborative Network, as well as other stakeholders from other charter networks in the city. It also includes university faculty, and this alliance is focused on identifying indicators of program quality and effectiveness among its charter schools. What's really interesting about New Orleans is that in New Orleans, I believe it's over 80% of the children there attend charter schools. So this is a really important research alliance.
And in New Mexico, we have 2 alliances. The first alliance that we have focuses on the achievement gap. And this alliance really is trying to look at reducing the achievement gap and identifying barriers to success, particularly for Hispanic and Native American students. Some of our Alliance members come from the Public Education Department. We have professors and researchers from universities, including University of New Mexico and New Mexico State. We also have representatives from the Cooperative Educational Services. We also have practitioners from various school districts around the state, and we also have a couple coalitions for school administrators. So the next alliance that we have in New Mexico focuses on pre-K. And they're really trying to look at linking their pre-K programs, outcomes, and data into the larger statewide pre-K to 12 data systems in order to inform policy and practice. Some of the alliance members come from various organizations aimed at supporting, researching, and disseminating information related to early childhood initiatives, such as New Mexico Voices for Children, the State of New Mexico Children, Youth, and Families, and also from the Public Education Department.
In Oklahoma, our Alliance members are focused on using research and data to better understand and address issues related to rural school performance. So some of our Alliance members that are affiliated with the Oklahoma Technical Assistance Center. Others are school administrators, such as those from Sweetwater Public Schools, and also we have faculty and staff from universities like Southwestern Oklahoma State University and the University of Oklahoma. And last but not least is Texas Hispanic STEM Research Alliance. Our members include here several administrators, faculty, and researchers from several universities in Texas, including UT Pan Am, UT Brownsville, I think UT San Antonio, representatives from the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. We've got regional educational service centers represented, including Region 1 down in the Valley. Several practitioners from school districts in the Rio Grande Valley and elsewhere in Texas, and representatives from the American STEM Alliance, which is a national organization looking at STEM issues related to minorities. These members in this alliance are focused really on understanding the pre-K 20 educational pipeline in Texas, with a goal basically to increase the number of Hispanic students enrolling in STEM and persisting in STEM careers. So those are the 6 alliances that the REL Southwest is working with. Now let's just talk briefly about the goals for this webinar.
So our primary goal today is to introduce people to an approach for developing a comprehensive and focused research agenda. We hope to share what we consider to be some important components of a research agenda with you, as well as kind of start to walk through some steps for developing such an agenda. These kind of steps will be things that we're introducing today, but will get followed up in face-to-face meetings in the upcoming months in each of the alliances.
So Michael and Melissa, people might be wondering out there why we even need to develop a research agenda.
Yeah, so people develop research agendas for a variety of reasons, right? Our research agendas basically are to help establish a common direction for researchers. For example, many of you are familiar with the National Research Council. They have, on occasion, established working committees that come together, and these committees review the literature and research base and generate a research agenda that basically provides a firm foundation for policy and practice in terms of, recognizing the need for future research. Based on these recommendations or that come from such committees, people seek funding for research projects and can design their research to address the research agenda and justify the need for the work.
Yeah, so the REL work is kind of similar and kind of different, I guess. With the REL work, we really hope to develop a research agenda for every alliance to update each year to guide the REL research studies that are conducted under that alliance. With participation from the research alliances, we hope to ensure that the research is responsive to their needs and relevant. In this work, we really want to make a distinction between what sometimes is called PI-driven research versus alliance-driven research. And we hope to achieve the latter by collaborating closely with each alliance to develop their research agendas that address their particular needs.
So some of you are probably wondering, what's in it for me and why are we actually here today? So just to recap, what you and your alliances have been doing over the last several months is you guys have been getting together and you've been discussing your research priorities. You've been talking about your topics, and for some even getting to talking about subtopics. The next step now in developing a research agenda is to prepare research questions and to identify appropriate research designs. We're going to begin working with our alliances in work sessions to draft these research agendas. These upcoming work sessions are scheduled for October and November. But so how does that actually relate to us today? Well, we're here today so you can have information that directly relates to those face-to-face work sessions. We also want to be sure that everyone has a common language for articulating your research, interests, and priorities around the Alliance's agenda.
Okay, so this is going over what we're doing today in the webinar. Basically, we're going to have a couple of group activities. So, and by group activities, we're going to be doing some polls, and we're going to have places. We've devoted time throughout the webinar to stop and pause for questions. And everyone should be able to see that to the right this questions box. And feel free. We invite anyone participating, even REL Southwest staff, if it doesn't get too overwhelming, to pose questions there. And what will happen is that these questions are just going to pile up, and we'll pause at points during the webinar, and we'll address them as well as we can. If we don't get to any questions, we will either follow up with an email response, or we will address it directly in the face-to-face work sessions that are upcoming. Then, in addition, we're going to spend a little time talking about what does a research agenda look like. We're going to share an example research agenda. You will know exactly what's going to be expected in terms of what's happening in the upcoming work sessions. We'll cover important considerations to think about when you're developing a research agenda. We have identified steps that we'll take you through, and that's primarily the majority of this webinar, is really talking about each of those steps, and we'll talk about the steps in general as a process, and then we'll go through every one of them. And all of this is really hoping that we can provide direct applications for future work in these upcoming work sessions, where by the end of the work session, we hope to have draft research agendas for every single alliance.
So, each of us here, we all have different ways and approaches to synthesizing information, and we may all turn to different kinds of sources for evidence to inform our work. So we wanted to start off by taking a little poll just to understand more about the ways in which our Alliance members use evidence. So you'll see above on the webinar, if you would take a few minutes to answer the poll, which asks, what types of evidence do you turn to most often to inform your work? You'll see that there are 6 different options. Please look them over with their definitions and choose your top 2. We'll give you a few minutes to read those over, and we'll report back the results. All right, thank you for answering our poll. So it looks like the poll is going on as we speak. But it looks like the most number of people say that they refer quite regularly to using data as their main source of evidence, which is really using measurable quantitative or qualitative information. It looks like that's followed up by research, which is The definition we have here is empirical findings derived from systematic analysis of information. After that, it looks like experience. There's about 50% of our participants indicating that. We have a lot fewer people also pointing to examples, specific cases or incidents. And we have one person indicating law or policy helps to inform them. So we really wanted to do this just because all of these represent a variety of sources from which to gather evidence, and they can all be valuable sources. Some of these are at our disposal more quickly than others. As we go through this webinar, we ask you to begin to think about and ask yourselves, where can the REL help support you in your work and help to make some of these types of evidence more accessible to you? We're going to return to this question later on in the webinar, so thank you for participating.
Okay, so now we're going to get into talking a little bit more specifically about a research agenda, and I think the first question probably on your minds is, what does a research agenda look like, and what are the components of a research agenda? And for the purposes of the REL Southwest and our alliances, we're defining a research agenda as a collection of focused research topics with a coherent set of research questions and designs that will help the Alliance achieve its goals.
Okay, so here is an example research agenda, and I'm going to go full screen. This is also available as a handout that you either received in an email or it's available on our resource page.
And it's titled Problem of Practice in your handout.
I'm in full screen and now I'm not. Okay, thank you. And so you may want to look at the handout if you're having trouble seeing it on the screen to follow along. And we're going to spend a little while on a couple of screens looking at this research agenda just to orient you to it. But if you have questions, we're going to have an opportunity for you to ask questions in a few minutes, so hold on with them. We're going to walk through then one topic, its subtopics, related research questions and design, and at the end we'll stop for those questions. I wanted to discuss, before we begin, a few caveats. This is an example agenda used to give you a sense of what we're striving to achieve for each alliance. We have purposefully selected a neutral alliance topic, so we don't have an alliance devoted to urban school improvement. The content of these tables, the topics, the subtopics, the research questions, and appropriate designs, that's all going to be generated together in these upcoming work sessions that we've got coming up in October and November. So this is just sharing with you what we think we hope to have by the end of these work sessions in draft form for every alliance member. Our alliances are in different stages of defining their topics and identifying subtopics, so there will be time devoted during the upcoming work sessions to continue those discussions if needed. Some alliances, though, already know their topics and subtopics, so the information for those columns could be pre-populated or we would quickly populate that during the work sessions.
Okay, so let me see if I can help folks kind of get oriented to this agenda that we have here. At the top of the table, as Melissa said, you see we've got a problem of practice, which is urban school improvement. Under this problem of practice, we have two large topic areas. One is the teacher pipeline, and the other is college and career readiness in that first column you see. Then under subtopics, we have three subtopics identified under the teacher pipeline, right? Preparation of teachers, teacher qualifications and certs, and teacher supply. For each subtopic then, if you continue over in the next columns, you see there are research questions and appropriate study designs to address those research questions. As Melissa said, most of the alliances to date have done some of the work on this table already, so they've identified a big problem of practice, some topic areas, and in some cases even identifying some subtopics under those topic areas.
So Melissa, some people may want to know how we got to these research questions and designs.
Right, so I'm sure that's the point of this webinar. So this example represents what we hope to have completed in the upcoming work sessions. To prepare everyone, we'll be walking through the steps to achieve this in just a few minutes. So here is a blank template. If you will, try to imagine that the upcoming work session, everyone will start with a blank template, right? Then we'll be filling in the topics and subtopics. So part of the work session will be spent revisiting the topics and subtopics for the Alliance and plugging that information in. In this case, the topics for our teacher pipeline and college and career readiness. Subtopics are teacher pipeline, for teacher and pipeline include preparation of teachers, teacher qualifications, certifications, and teacher supply. After that, we'll begin filling out draft research questions for every subtopic. To accomplish this, we plan to divide members into different subtopics perhaps and have them brainstorm questions maybe in breakout sessions for each of those subtopics. I can imagine once people have some ideas of some generated questions, they'll bring them back to a whole group and come together and reach consensus about what are the most important research questions for those subtopics. Another similar activity will occur for identifying the appropriate research study designs. And we'll have REL Southwest research staff present in the rooms to help facilitate these conversations. But by the end of the day, we hope to have all of the cells sort of drafted in terms of all of research questions and appropriate designs. All right, so let's stop, and we've got one question. People, take time if you have a question. Please submit that in the questions box. We're going to pause for a second, or do we want to?
So we have one question out there. Maybe we want to tackle that one if people are writing in others.
Okay.
So Laura's asking, is this going to be quantitative or qualitative research?
That's a very good question. And we're going to address some of that today, right, Michael?
Yeah.
So later on in the presentation, we will be discussing different types of research along the continuum, and we're going to, some of that could lend itself more to qualitative research, and some of it will lend itself more to quantitative research. I would say perhaps right now would be a good time to emphasize the RELs in this particular contract period are focused primarily on state longitudinal data systems and using those data. And so those are archival data sets that are, compiled by the states or by districts or by other entities in charge of that for our region. And we'll be largely looking to do a lot of data analysis with the archival data sets. But I think, I'm the lead of Task 3, and Task 3 is where we provide analytical technical support. And there are opportunities there for us to do trainings or projects that really are trying to build capacity of Alliance members to think about qualitative data analysis much more. And I think, particularly well, it's probably true in all of our states, I know we have plenty of interest in more qualitative analyses, and we'll be looking to do a lot of that in Task 3. Task 4 will primarily be more quantitative.
Yeah, I would imagine, particularly when we're using state longitudinal data systems, that the work is going to largely be more quantitative in nature in those projects, for sure.
Okay, we have one other question from Vicki Demick. She asked, how often can we revise our research agenda?
Right, so Vicki knows the answer to this.
Yeah,
It's a bit of a
softball question.
So this is good. Thank you, Vicki. We will be revising these research agendas every year. So we are this might be a good time to talk about how the RELs are contracts with the U.S. Department of Education. We have then annual plans that get submitted every year that define our scope of work. We have to understand and anticipate that year of work, and we are then paid on a contract to complete that year of work. So there will be a revision of these research agendas probably, I mean, almost every time we look at it, I'm sure we're going to be wanting to revise it, but certainly new agendas will be submitted every year as part of our annual plan. Are there any other questions? All right, let's keep going then. So where do we begin? Where do sources of research ideas come from? And we put this slide in here because we don't want people to get intimidated by this. Research ideas come from a variety of different places, from everyday life. I can share a personal example. Let's say my daughter Grace is in middle school. She just started middle school this year, and she comes home to me and she tells me that she's just not a math person. She's not good at math. So why does she think this? Research ideas often can come from an everyday life example. They could also then, it tends to be that you would want to think about it in terms of relating it to practical or policy issues. For example, are single-sex schools and classrooms better for girls to assume to be good at math? And we're frequently looking to previous research to understand what answers already exist and what hasn't been done. So we can ask the next question, right? So the National Research Council 2011 found that gender differences in STEM achievement vary among districts and schools. Why? Where people can look at theory and generate interesting new questions. In this case, children develop schemas or naive perceptions that help them organize gender differences and gender roles. There's lots of interesting questions that can come out of that, right?
So for this portion of the webinar, we're going to be referring to the handout called Important Considerations when Developing a Research Agenda. These notes are going to be a resource for the upcoming work sessions and hopefully will serve as a guide for you during each step. If you haven't done so already, please download this handout so you can follow along.
Yeah, so what we'd like to do here is to start raising some issues that we think are important for people to consider as we start to develop research agendas in each of these alliances this year. Some of the guiding principles that we've identified to date are things like to address meaningful research questions and use the strongest designs and methods possible. Important questions to ask ourselves in regard to addressing meaningful questions are things like, does the research really address well-defined questions or set of questions? In this regard, it's really looking at issues like, are the questions clearly specified and detailed enough to be meaningful? It's something to consider as we move forward. Also, thinking about meaningful questions, do the questions ensure that the research is important and relevant to the field? And then lastly, does the study use and build on existing theory and research and offer new knowledge to the field or area of study? In addition to addressing meaningful questions, we're also highlighting the guideline to use the strongest research designs and methods available. And some of the things to kind of consider when we're thinking about this as a guideline to developing our research agendas is the design appropriate to address the research questions? What are the strengths and limitations of proposed study design in the Alliance? And then what will the study findings tell us? What claims can be made from any particular study that we're proposing? So these are things that we'll be discussing more as we go through the webinar today for sure, and continue the conversations in our face-to-face meetings this fall.
All right, so here are the steps to developing a research agenda. We came up with these steps to describe basically how you get there. You'll see there's 6 steps, and we made this a cycle because the agenda is a working document, and we'll return to it and revise it each year based on that, on the research that does occur, right? So the image describes an iterative process that moves from general research questions to fully specified research questions. And along the way, you'll see that you identify research designs and methods. But no method and no design is perfect, right? So it's important then to weigh the limitations and trade-offs for each possible study. This helps us then to specify and revise and then conduct the research. And after doing research, that generates a whole new set of questions that need to be addressed. We can write up future projects, ideas, and revise the agendas to address the evolving needs and questions of the Alliance through this cycle. So the remainder of this webinar, we're really going to go through every one of these steps, giving you a sense of what needs to be accomplished in the upcoming work sessions. And for each step, we try to discuss important questions and considerations, as well as what this might look like in the work session.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about generating research questions. But before we actually get into that, let's orient ourselves to what's going to happen in our upcoming face-to-face sessions. We're going to be spending some time discussing our potential research questions for each subtopic. It's likely that in these workshop sessions, we'll break into different groups and tackle specific topics and subtopics. We're going to brainstorm questions, and then we're going to report back to the group to get consensus on the questions. We're going to have facilitators presenting to guide these discussions, and they're going to help the breakout groups and the larger group consider some of the characteristics of good research questions. So as we began to develop these research questions, we came up with a few guidelines to be asking ourselves as we began to generate these. First, you would want to ask, are the research questions reasonable? Are they doable? Are they actionable? For example, one alliance, and I'm making this up, is interested in studying whether an elementary school reading intervention reduces rates of students identified with reading disabilities in the long term, looking at them all the way through middle and high school. What do you think? Is this reasonable? So what I would say is that the time frame for this study is beyond the scope of the RAL. For the 5-year time frame, the RAL, the interested research questions could not be fully answered with this scope. So we would either need to change the scope of the question so we could meet the appropriate timeline. The other thing I would ask is, are the questions appropriate? Do they fit with the Alliance's goals and purpose? Let's say another alliance was focused on school lunch programs related to nutrition and academic outcomes. So many of you know that my husband's a chef, and maybe he has a theory that eating pork belly and spinach help kids to grow and be healthy, and so therefore they're going to do better in school. So I might think a great study would be, let's suggest that kids eat pork belly and spinach once a week. So while this does sound like a super yummy research project that I would be interested in studying, it may not be the most appropriate one to develop a research study around. So then you also have to ask, are the research questions answerable? Is the data there that can be gathered to answer the questions? For example, maybe there's a high school intervention program that's only in its first year of implementation. You might want to know if this program helps to increase graduation rates for at-risk students. But really, it's too early to link the program outcomes to the data and the questions that we want answered. Lastly, I would ask, are the questions specific enough? Am I going to be able to understand the research questions that you're asking? We have to make sure that when you're formulating your questions, that they're specific enough to define who or what you want to study, at what point, and are they clear enough to understand the outcome that you want to be answered. So the goal for all of this that we're going through this process is to move from a very general question, which is, as Melissa pointed out, just like why is my daughter not good in math or thinks she's not good in math, to getting some very specific answerable questions.
Okay, so step 2 is consider the existing evidence base. And basically the question you ask yourself here is, does it extend theory and the research base, or seek new knowledge? So some important questions. Does the research reflect a solid understanding of the relevant theoretical, methodological, or empirical work that's come before? How does the research extend the knowledge and research base? These are conversations that we're going to have, and there's a variety of people that will be with us in the rooms while we're working on these agendas that will be able to answer those questions, including the Alliance members and research staff and our partners who are very well aware of the existing research. But these are also things that we'll return to. So as we further refine the questions, further decide on the studies that are appropriate for these questions, we'll be developing concept papers, proposals, and we'll be returning to this big question of, what is the value added by doing a study for the Alliance members, but also for the research base, right?
Now let's turn to my favorite step, which is identifying research designs. In this step, we're really trying to match designs and methods carefully to the selected questions of interest that the Alliance has identified. Particular designs and methods are better suited for some questions than other questions, but I would just caution that it's rare that any one particular design can address all the questions of interest. In this way, it's really something to keep in mind is that no design is necessarily perfect, and as we move forward, this is going to be something that we'll have to kind of challenge ourselves with to both maximize the best design that we think is available to us, given the data and the questions, to push these questions forward. An important question to ask then is, what sort of design best answers the questions of interest? So this is kind of a step where we're linking research questions to the design, and it's an important part of the process. There's often a relationship between the way a research question is stated and what type of design is likely to be the best fit to address this question. For instance, literature reviews, as here is shown, are a good way to address questions like, what's known about X? If we want to know more about what is known about, for instance, attributing teacher effectiveness to educator prep programs, a literature review may be a really appropriate approach. Let's talk a little bit about exploratory and descriptive studies, which are certainly appropriate designs for gaining a better understanding about the nature of a particular problem in particular, such as what support systems are provided during a student-teacher's pre-service experience. Correlational studies are also useful designs to look at relationship questions, right? So you're looking at relationships between two particular factors or variables, and you're interested in how are they associated? What's the relationship between X and Y? An example might be a typical research question such as, what is the relationship between teacher prep programs and teacher evaluation results? And lastly, we focus on causal questions, which in particular can address the impacts of particular interventions or programs on outcomes of interest. For instance, a causal research question may be, how effective is a particular education prep program at preparing middle school math teachers? This idea that how research questions are worded or phrased can be associated with certain types of study designs is highlighted here for us. If we go back to our original example, research agenda, you can see that questions starting with phrases such as what is known are often good questions to be addressed with a literature review. And likewise, questions that begin with phrases such as what's the relationship between might be good questions to be addressed with a correlational study.
We're going to check our PowerPoint. Just a moment. Thank you for your patience while we find we had some technical difficulty.
Okay, great. Thank you. Can we make this full? Because
Yes.
I think I'm going to
I
stay
think
on
I'm going to let Jackie do
Okay.
that.
I'm going to stay on this a little while, so I want to kind of let people
Stop touching
look at this a little bit. So let's look at another way to look at linking research questions to designs, using the common types of REL research products and reports. I believe there's a handout that that was accessible to you by link, which has this table in it if you'd like to refer to that instead. But with this table, each column emphasizes different types of studies, designs, that allow us to answer different types of questions, and in that process make different kinds of claims. So what's known research in the first column that you see there, or actually a second column, allows us to address what is known about a problem using literature reviews or systematic evidence reviews like WWC type reviews of extant literature and studies. What's happening research products address the nature of a particular problem using exploratory or descriptive study designs. And then the next column, making connections reports, will use correlational study designs to address questions about relationships between critical factors or variables. And then the last column, making an impact reports, will use experimental studies or randomized controlled trials to address the impact of particular programs or interventions. Another way to look at this, if you look across these columns, left to right, if you will, is what we're starting to call a research continuum that could be described as a series of stages that play an important role as part of a systematic research and development process in education. The stages, or columns, if you will, move from left to right in a progression of research questions and designs which could build upon one another to address the research and development of particular interventions or policies or even practices. As the last row demonstrates in this graphic, across the continuum there's an increasing level of evidence, especially in regard to assessing the impact of a potential policy or program. So let's talk about an example. I'm not sure I'm going to go with the pork belly and spinach one, but I think, why don't we talk a little bit about Melissa's example of her daughter and math issues. If we use a research continuum, we might first ask, is there a literature review on this topic? What's known about gender issues in math? We may also ask, what sort of studies have been done on this topic? Have descriptive or exploratory studies been conducted to better define and understand this problem? Have any correlational studies been conducted, maybe looking at the relationship between non-cognitive factors in math achievement with girls? Perhaps there are already interventions that have been developed targeting girls' math outcomes. We could test, or in an impact study, for instance. In this way, the continuum may be helpful to guide the Alliance conversations in terms of where the next study or set of studies need to happen, and when, to provide the evidence needed to address the problem of interest for the Alliance. This approach may also allow Alliances to think about multiple linked studies that are done perhaps in phases over the course of a 5-year contract. So we're hoping that this idea of a research continuum can serve as just a helpful tool for alliances to potentially use to begin to consider it as a tool to frame their research agendas, perhaps as a progression of research questions and designs that are appropriate for them to increasingly make evidence-based decisions about policies and practices. We will be further developing this idea of the research continuum in the upcoming months, and we hope to be able to talk about it more as a tool in our ongoing meetings this fall as the alliances begin to really dig into this task of framing a research agenda around each of their particular topics. Questions or comments?
So Michael, we have one really good question out there that maybe you could tackle. Laura's asking, she's still a little bit unclear, a lit review is simply an appropriate part of any research study. Are you simply saying that some questions only need a literature review?
Yeah, so I guess the way I'd answer that is to say, yeah, we are thinking about there are certain kinds of studies or questions that the end-all be-all would just be a literature review, where we would be asking simply to canvass the literature about what's known about a particular topic area or a problem. Now that being said, this is actually a great example of potentially how things can start to kind of link together in terms of these study designs and this continuum notion. Because I think, Laura's point's well taken that any good correlational, descriptive, or even impact study design that comes later would really be nested or fronted by that literature review, right? That would really kind of set the foundation for the whole idea. So the literature review is kind of the first step in a lot of places where you're just asking what's known, what's out there, what's the quality of the evidence out there, what's the quality of the literature, to start to kind of address more substantive issues.
The only thing I would add to that is that I think lit reviews, explained, they're easy to do. We don't have to have the data in-house. And for this first year, you'll see that we are proposing a variety of different lit reviews for year 1 and year 2 and task 4. And it is a great place for us to start. I'm working with a research group in task 4 on the Texas Hispanic STEM, and we want to eventually understand and be able to predict what are indicators of long-term outcomes, defined as successful in a study, but we don't know what those indicators are. So we're starting with a literature review, and it's also because we don't have that data in-house yet to begin analyzing. So this is sort of a reasonable question. But it also is largely defined by the REL itself and the products that they produce, and they have these products called What's Known. And anything that we tackle in Task 4 as a research project leads to a publication that IES will produce. And so those categories that are in Michael's table and continuum are from the REL product categories.
So Melissa and Michael, we have one other question. Vicky's asking, what if there's a program or intervention that's already being used? Can we study that?
Sure. I think that in many ways that would be the preference, because we hopefully will have some evidence that the feasibility of implementing the program in real educational settings is very high. It may not have been studied. The fidelity of implementation may not have been studied, but I think it would be an opportunity to study an intervention that's already out there in the field, and that could be really valuable.
Yeah, I'm going to add the practical side of that from our perspective, though, too, is that intervention studies go through a proposal process. All the task force studies go through a proposal process, and intervention studies are particularly well reviewed, and they take a while. So we would, in terms of feasibility and in terms of thinking through our agendas, we need to get thinking about that as soon as possible, because this is a 5-year contract, and we have to think about what kinds of interventions do we want to study in the future, and to do that through the system that we have to submit in terms of reviews, we would want to get started thinking about that in year 2 for sure.
Right.
So David Rogers has a question that I think is along those lines that you were just talking about, Melissa. He asked, you mentioned the use of archival data for the purposes of our research, but Vicky's question would suggest that we'd have time and resources to gather additional data. Will we have time and resources to do that additional data collecting?
Yes, so it is a 5-year contract, and I think, so this is just my understanding, but I think the links to archival data sets or to state longitudinal data systems is really trying, the department's really trying to continue to spearhead that among the states in the country, right? So there are lots of initiatives right now in federal money to improve state longitudinal data systems, and that they also want those data to be really available to research. And by making this part of our mission as a REL, we will end up really pushing those state systems to address research needs. Now, at the same time, not every state is ready to do that. In fact, most of the states aren't ready to do that. So, there's only so much we'll be able to do with that. And along Michael's continuum, we have a very ample opportunity to gather data and other types of data, prospective data even.
Yep.
It does go through an OMB process, but it is something, I don't think in these work sessions we should be too concerned with that. We're still early in the game, and we can plan to have long-term studies that gather other data sets.
Right. The trade-off with OMB clearance is that it typically takes between 6 to 9 months, and I may be being optimistic even about that. So there's a trade-off of having, prospective data collection take a while to get reviewed and cleared at the federal level to do this work. But I believe it's still worthwhile to consider, particularly if we feel like it's data that would add value to addressing high-priority research questions in any given alliance.
And then there is we can play the relationship between Task 3 and Task 4 pretty strategically. I've talked about this in some other meetings, but the idea is, so in Task 3, we are really trying to build the research alliance members' capacity to collect and use data. And if, for instance, there is a need to continue to collect survey data that an alliance is already, a member of the alliance is already collecting survey data, we can help refine the survey to be relevant to the research questions that come up in these agendas. And in Task 3, we can do a lot. We can assist you in collecting survey data that then becomes archival data that we can analyze. So there are some strategies that we can employ if we put our heads together around this.
Looks like we have a couple people typing.
Good.
Okay, Laura asked a really great question. So if there is some new data collection, who owns that data?
That is a good question. So if it's the case that what Melissa just described, where the data is collected by alliance members or organizations in the alliance, that data and becomes part of their archival data system, it's their data that would be used by the REL researchers to analyze and be part of any Task 4 or Task 3 study.
Right, and so if we are using state longitudinal data systems, it's the states, we are submitting requests for those data, and we hope to have the data in-house and that we'll be analyzing for our work. So it's a tricky, there's some data sharing agreements that we'll be forming with every state and with every entity that we're requesting data from. So that's a sort of tricky thing. But I think in the case, right, like if we had an alliance member that was bringing data to the table, and we are just working with them, there's no ownership of data that I'm aware of that we would assume in that case.
Rudy Reyna has a question, and he's asking that's relevant to the Texas data set. So he's wondering if the RAL Southwest will have access to the full Higher Education Coordinating Board and Texas Education Agency data.
Great. So, hi, Rudy. That's a good question. We, and this will be true for other states too. So we are in the process of requesting data from all over the place. And in Texas in particular, we're pursuing it at every single angle. The Higher Education Coordinating Board and TEA data are all available through the educational research centers here in Texas. And we are submitting a data request proposal for that, an application for that, access to that data. So we do anticipate having all of that data. If that fails, if we are unavailable, we're going to go at it from multiple angles. We'll go directly to Higher Ed Coordinating Board and TEA to get those requests. And we are actually, we might end up doing all of those different avenues. But the goal would be, yes, to have all those data.
All right, so we're going to move on for now, but we want to encourage you to keep typing in the question sections as we go through. We're going to be going through some more slides, but we want to be sure we answer your questions.
Okay, great. So we've gone through a few of the steps. We're at the bottom of our wheel. We've already talked about generating questions, kind of extending the theory and evidence base with the questions we consider answering, and identifying research designs. And then I think the next step is really a critical step, right, which is to weigh the strengths and limitations of the findings or the designs that you've chosen in each of your studies. The important questions we'd like to ask the alliances to consider when they're thinking at this step of the process is to think about what claims can and cannot be made from any particular study design that they propose. You know, what are the critical limitations or biases that need to be discussed with each of the studies? Are there other reasonable explanations for the findings that need to be considered? And then lastly, how far can the findings be generalized in terms of student populations or school settings? So these are just basic kind of questions to start to keep in mind when you're weighing the strengths and limitations of research designs and or findings. Returning to our example research agenda, each alliance will want to discuss some of the strengths and weaknesses of the designs they choose. For example, what kind of claims can be made from a correlational study looking at teacher prep programs and teacher evaluations? What can you not say? I think one thing is you want to be careful about drawing any kind of causal relationship, obviously, between these factors, even if the relationship is very high and very positive. What sort of limitations will be important to explore with a literature review? They're often very dependent on the quality and quantity of the extant literature out there. So that may be important issues to discuss and explore as part of your conversations in the alliance. And then just one last point is around descriptive studies. They may have critical limitations or strengths based on the quality of the data available to address the questions. So to address the second research question above, the alliance would need to address the quality and reliability of student teaching self-report data that'd be available, and consider whether the data would provide strong enough and convincing enough findings to capture and describe adequately teachers' first year of field experience. So these are just some questions to kind of keep in mind again.
All right, So in step 5, we begin the process of specifying and revising. The idea here is to take a more general statement and specify. Some important questions to keep in mind are, what are the data sources? How will the data specify that question? Who are the subjects of the study? What subgroups of people are we interested in? What outcomes do we want to measure? How are they measured? And how will the data define the outcomes? So a question moves from something general, like what are the factors associated with Hispanic students' success in STEM, to something more specific. What are the key indicators of students' post-secondary enrollment persistence and degree of completion in STEM fields? So it's not a fully specified question because you could specify the subgroups, the subjects, the data sources, but for this example, factors become indicators, and you can even specify those indicators even more to be like enrollment in 8th grade algebra. How does enrollment in 8th grade algebra, what is the relationship of that between these outcomes? And so the general question specifies student success by saying it's further defined as post-secondary enrollment, persistence, and degree completion in STEM fields. And the final step is to conduct research. So in the remaining years of this contract, the REL Southwest will, with guidance from our alliances, will be engaged in doing the research projects identified in the agendas. The results of these research projects will continue to inform the alliance members as well as the agendas. These agendas are working documents, like we said, and will be revised annually as the research evidence is accumulated. So all good research leads to more good questions. So again, let's pause. Were there any other additional questions before we move on? We're about to do another poll.
Let's see. Rudy's asking if we have the slide for step 5. I don't see it in my copy.
I'll go back. So that's step 5. This to specify and revise is step 5. It shouldn't, I guess it should say that at the top somewhere. And then step 6 is conduct research. If you're looking at the handout, it could be on the back page. The one handout, important considerations when developing a research agenda, is two-sided, 2 pages. So there's a couple places where you'll be able to get the information, and if you're not able to access it now, we will be able to get you the handouts later.
Vicky's asking, how far will we get in our agenda during our face-to-face meeting?
I think that's another good question. I don't know. I think everyone sort of, each alliance is in a different stage of discussing their topics and priority topics. I think a goal is to have something drafted for every cell in that template for every topic and subtopic. I don't know if that's possible to achieve, but I think that's our target expectation for that. With that in mind, though, we do not expect those to be fully specified questions. So those, and the ones that are in that agenda are not, in the example, are not fully specified. So, so I think, the idea is to probably get the more general questions down, understanding that they need to be specified, but we can revise those agendas from our end and pose them back with revisions to the alliance members afterwards to make sure that they agree to how we've specified them if they're not there yet.
Yeah, I would just add too, I think the goal today was to present all the potential steps to kind of going through at least this cycle once. But I don't know that that's necessarily a full expectation. That's going to
Right.
happen in one meeting.
Right.
But we wanted to make people aware of the entire process so that they can kind of start on these set of steps or on this little road to developing their research agenda with kind of a fuller awareness in mind, what the whole process takes and looks like.
And I know we're going to be preparing for those work sessions, so we'll have handouts to give out during those work sessions that'll take people through these steps more clearly. But this was just to kind of give you an overview of what we hope to achieve in the upcoming work session. So if there aren't any more questions, we're going to continue. Brenda?
All right, so if you remember, I asked you we took our poll earlier. We're going to come back to this, so here we are again. And what we did is we took our same question we asked earlier, but we've altered it a little bit. And so now I'm wondering if you guys could answer what types of evidence will be useful to address your alliance's problem of practice. So again, looking over our 6 different kinds of evidence we looked at earlier, and now we've added one more category, which is just other. Maybe you have in mind other ideas in which the RAL Southwest can help you in your alliance's research priorities. So please take a few minutes and vote, and also provide any comments in the chat box if you want to add a little bit more to your answer. All right, so I see a number of you are checking off data. That's the ways in which the RAL can help inform your alliance's research priorities. I see close behind that a number of you are putting research. That's great. I see a few are putting experience, some first-hand knowledge, skill, or perspective. A couple are putting testimony. I could see that maybe that could lead to other types of research that we talked about, maybe more qualitative types of ways of looking at the data or describing stories. A few people have put examples, specific cases or incidents. Perhaps we could do some case studies out there. A couple people have put law and policy. I'd be a little curious to know more about the ways in which they would hope the RAL could help us out on that. And then a couple people that put other are typing in some comments. Let's see, Rose Peterson said, we need to make use of all existing data and research, even on the local level, before beginning to gather our own. We need a research scan of what is already out there. That's really great, Rose. I know some of our RAL Southwest staff are going to be conducting data inventories, and they are really going to be looking at every state in which we have an alliance. They're going to be looking at what data set is out there, what kind of variables are available to us, and they're in the process of doing that right now, because that is a large part of our purpose is to be using the existing data sources, to be using them maybe in ways that they haven't been used, and find other ways to use them more efficiently. So that's definitely one of the REL's priorities.
I would follow up with that to say lit reviews are a very good way to do that as well. We can scan the research and literature and determine what has been done, what's already been accomplished in terms of research there. And we'll be doing that for every research project that we propose. It's required.
Let's see, Rudy Reyna says, depending on the policy, a properly thought out policy regarding STEM education could have a significant impact in this area.
Yeah, I agree. I think the relationship between the REL and the Alliance members themselves could be very beneficial to policy. So I agree. I think that we can take the research that we do together and we can really shape some of the policy moving forward. So I think that's true. And I just wanted to say I'm very happy to see responses in all of the categories, because I think the REL is particularly well suited to research and data. And I think you should certainly look at, there isn't a lot of research and data resources out there for the average practitioner or policymaker, and I think you should really look at the REL as a resource, dollars to devote towards doing research that you want to see and have it be more readily available and in your hands and at your feet. At the same time, I do feel all of these different types of evidences are important, and they are things that we will be hopefully addressing with REL research resources as well.
Yeah, and just to, I think, talk a little bit more, I think, about where Rudy's point is going, that I see is, it's a good, the REL can focus on policies in particular, or programs, or even practices, and really start to further develop those policies, practices, or programs through some sort of an R&D, systematic R&D process. And that's why we decided early on to bring this notion of a research continuum to the table in making these conversations, because we really feel it's important for Alliance members to be able to see a big picture over 5 years, that they could develop and test policies or develop and test programs in the process of this contract and under the guise of this contract. It's something that I think could be a big success story that comes out of these alliances.
Let's see, we have a comment from Teresita Aguilar. She says, descriptive data on institutional changes rather than limiting the focus on student-teacher as the primary unit of analysis that can reflect an increased level of commitment.
Right, so I agree. I think we could certainly, using institutional data, do a lot of descriptive work, and that could be informed by Alliance members entirely. So I agree. I think that would be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I would also add that, this is why we're coming to you as the Alliance members, to help us figure out what unit of analysis are you interested in, and you are the primary drivers of this. So we are relying on you to see what are the needs. So we are looking for you to tell us at what level are you interested in studying. So thank you.
All right, so I think we're going to move on. Oh, one more question.
Let's see. Rudy asked a follow-up, having someone who is well-versed in taking a systems approach to STEM education for Hispanic students could make a difference in evaluating the impact of a policy.
That's true, and again, this is where having members like Rudy and others who can really contribute to the thinking around the research, it could have a real powerful impact on what research can do in terms of policy and practice in our region. Another thing we can bring up that's happening in terms of the year 2 work is that we are thinking about logic models, so an instrument that's really critical for understanding how to research issues and challenges in our region are around logic models, developing logic models where we identify what's happening in a, let's say, pre-K to 20 pipeline, what kinds of outcomes are needed, it's becoming a key process for us in terms of identifying things to measure that are outside of the archival data sets and are outside. And they become then really strong communication tools for illustrating issues to policies and policymakers and practitioners, that as well as a research tool that we can then begin identifying measures and studies to address key issues around these logic models.
Right, and I think to Rudy's point, I think logic models are a good example, I think at least, in terms of being able to put our hands around some of the more system-level issues that are going on. So you can include multiple levels of analysis, going back to Teresita's point about being able to identify multiple units of analysis to kind of strengthen the overall impact of whatever you're studying. So logic models are a nice way to kind of conceptualize that work in a way that's multi-level and systematic, systems-focused to demonstrate its impact.
Rudy says someone suggests someone look at MTech as a possible partner at some point for a systems approach.
Okay. That's good. We will take note of that. Thanks, Rudy. All right, so I think we're going to move on.
All right, so I hope we have you getting excited for our upcoming work sessions now that you know what we're going to cover. We have our 6 alliance meetings listed here. You can see we have Arkansas Pre-K is scheduled for October 29th. We have Louisiana Charter Schools. That looks like the first one coming up on October 8th. We have the New Mexico Achievement Gap on October 24th. We are still polling for the New Mexico Pre-K, so we will let you know about that one. We also have October 24th scheduled for the Oklahoma Rural Schools, and the Texas Hispanic STEM is to be determined. So what we hope you do now is that in these sessions that we are going to begin to generate these research questions that we've been talking about related to your alliance's topics and subtopics. And we hope to leave with an initial research agenda for your alliance that can help guide our work over the next, in the short term, year 1, but over the next 4 years as well. So during these upcoming agenda work sessions, what we hope to accomplish is to continue to review the Alliance prioritized topics and subtopics that you members, Alliance members have been discussing and refining over the past few months. We know there have been a number of monthly meetings in which you've been discussing these. We want to continue to brainstorm some research questions for these subtopics. Then we want to begin to consider the research study designs. Then we also want to bring in the conversation, all right, what are the challenges and weigh the limitations of these study designs? And lastly, we want to specify and revise. As Melissa said, we might come up with some initial questions, and depending on some of the limitations that we talked about or some of the clarity that's still needed, we might need to come back again and say, maybe we need to ask this question a little bit differently. So, what are we asking you guys to do before our next session? We want you to continue thinking about your priority topics. I know your Alliance liaisons have been working hard to get you out the monthly notes, so we ask that you be reviewing these and to be continuing to think about your research topics. What research questions interest you under those different topic areas? Email questions to your Alliance liaison before your next work session so we can get those questions in early. And lastly, we ask you to begin to think about how the research extends the theory and the evidence base. Many of you out there are the experts in the field. You work in there every day, and so you know the research that's out there. And so we're also leaning on you to figure out how can this work extend the theory and evidence base. So we appreciate your comments at those face-to-face in helping us figure out if we are really adding value to the field.
All right, so that is the end of our session, of our webinar. Thank you so much. I really, really hope this was helpful to you. I hope we've been talking a lot about building a research agenda, and I hope this puts a little more information in your minds about what the expectations are for that, what we hope to accomplish in the upcoming work sessions. You'll be hearing, you'll be in further communication with your Alliance liaisons and your Alliance researchers around those sessions. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact your Alliance liaisons around that. But we will have this archived at some point in the near future. It'll be available, and we will make that available to people who were unable to participate with us live today. I also wanted to remind you that all of these webinars that we host as part of the REL Southwest and at least Task 3 is we need to do a stakeholder feedback survey, and so I just wanted to let you know that as participants of this, you will be receiving a survey through the email, and if you could complete that, we'd appreciate it.
I'd also like to add that we're going to leave the chat pods open for a couple minutes, so if you want to continue to give us some of your input and feedback, and if we don't get a chance to answer them now, we can answer them back in the face-to-face.
And since we're ending a little early, one possibility now is that we could unmute the participants and people could have some last comments before they sign off or questions that we can address, and we can get out of this weird webinar mode. So can people hear us? And someone talk so we can...
Hello, it's Laura.
Okay, good. Hi, Laura.
Hi.
Thank you for your question.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe I'm the wrong person to be answering questions, honestly, because I am just sitting in for our head of school, so I have not participated in all the previous. I participated in one other webinar or conversation much earlier, but I am still unclear on the whole goals and what we're trying to do here and what the actual outcome that we're trying to achieve. And it's totally appropriate for you to tell me, like, that's not a question we're going to answer or anything like that, but and maybe it's because I'm in the process of getting my PhD, and so I'm doing a lot of work on qualitative and quantitative research that I'm just trying to understand, like, what our goal actually is in this process. I mean, are we researching? We're conducting a study. You guys are going to write a study and publish it? Like, what are we doing here? I mean, you skimmed over a lot of, I mean, I've spent 6 semesters here working on qualitative and quantitative research classes that we've just sort of distilled into like an hour. And I would imagine other people have that background too. I'm not the only one.
So can you let me, I'm sorry, which research alliance are you a part of?
I'm in New Orleans.
Is this Laura?
Yeah.
Hi, Laura. You've missed a couple of meetings. I can fill you in.
And I'm sorry, it's really because Sean Wilson is the head of school, and he's usually sitting in, and he's out of town, so he asked me to sit in. So
Right. I can forward you the other information that we have had in the past. So, again, they are working with us and many of our members to create research that would be helpful for us.
To create research, like to call from exist. So basically, part of the benefit to us of being a part of this is that we will get a product, and that product will be
helpful to us.
A lit review of all the possible studies out there, potentially on quality indicators, program effectiveness, or something like that. But we're not necessarily going to conduct a research study in New Orleans of effective charter schools and thereby create those indicators. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, if I could jump in here, we're actually proposing to do both of those. Two distinct products for the Alliance. This is Patrick Wolf at the University of Arkansas. And one would be a review of the available evidence on charter school effectiveness and what makes charter schools effective, with particular attention to any studies of New Orleans. And then the second would be to do an actual new and original analysis of the characteristics of New Orleans charters that are associated with student achievement gains.
Got it. Okay, so there is actually an outcome of actually conducting research. Okay.
Yep.
And then you all would actually be conducting the research, like you would be sending researchers to schools, you would be, I mean, how is the study being conducted?
We will be drawing from some existing databases and then augmenting those with administrative data and principal surveys and things provided by the schools themselves.
Okay, so do you see any qualitative component to this, or this is really just a quantitative study?
At this point, we are proposing it as a quantitative study.
Okay. Thank you. That's a very important question to clarify things for me. And publication of the results of this, who is writing this up and how is that being credited? Does that get credited to this research group and the participants? Like if you present this information, if you write up the study, if you publish this, who owns that?
Right. It'll be written up by CETL researchers, namely myself and Shanna Shaw, and it would be published as a REL document through the Institute for Education Sciences, and then it'll be publicized, disseminated.
Okay. Thank you. I really appreciate you answering those questions for me.
Right, and I'll forward the other stuff to you, Laura.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.
You're welcome.
All right, so I'm getting the signal. We're done.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Have a good one.